one of my Saturday morning streams, bright and early. I'm lucky enough to have Micheal from the Canadian Atheist back to continue our discussion about his discussion with JRobin on Clubhouse. So we're going to be kind of, I think, starting pretty much right back from where we left off at about the 48, 50-minute mark or so in the kind of into their conversation. And I think it was actually at that point it was starting to get wasn't really starting to get heated, but I think JRobin is already starting to sound a little touchy. But anyway, I'll stop talking and let Micheal say good morning.
Yeah, morning, everybody. Yeah, we're still building the meat, and that is the shit sandwich. That was this conversation. But yeah, it was. It's weird. I've listened back to the whole thing now overall, and as I said to Robin towards the end of this, like I would do this again with him. He's not the kind of person I can talk to. It is the kind of thing you need a little bit of Thorazine for, but
for him or for you? For him or for you?
Well, why not both? But yeah, but it was an interesting conversation nonetheless. But yeah, we should jump into this.
Yeah, but same rules apply as usual for anybody watching in the live chat. Thanks for coming bright and early. But if I have any playback issues, volume issues, anything like that, I think we had some mic issues last week with Michael's gain. That was on my side of things, and I adjusted that down. I hope that helped. I didn't get any more comments that things were coming through gainy or poppy or anything, so I think it worked. But anything like that, give a shout out in the live chat. I will do my best to catch that. And I'm going to start this video, and I might have to skip around a little bit because I'm not sure. Nope, this is right. This is right where it was before. All right. Let me minimize Micheal and I
or something. This is seeming too professional for me.
Yeah, I had this all spooled up and ready to go. Fortunately, all these cookies and I don't on this particular laptop I never clear the history. This is for streaming, so yeah, all this stuff was ready to go. It was nice. I probably shouldn't have mentioned anything about clearing the history. Now I've just opened myself up to hackers. So I was like, oh, that thing's wide open. Yeah, good morning, Carlton Winston. Carlton is good for anyone that's interested. If Micheal and I start droning on, if this conversation gets a little too weird or pedantic or however you want to judge it, Carlton will be going live at around 10 a.m. to do one of his breakdowns of D. Roy Cruz, who's also an interesting Christian personality. Not quite as he's an older fella and he's not quite as aggressive as JRobin, but I don't know. I could kind of see JRobin becoming D. Roy Cruz. In about another 30, 40 years. So who knows?
Well, it's weird because I can see Robin becoming doing the the full. I want to say he's in maybe. He might be in the chrysalis stages right now of becoming Double D.
Yeah.
But I think he's definitely on the way to that metamorphosis.
Yep, definitely. No, I see that too. All right. Uh-oh. Okay, we just lost Micheal. What happened? He'll be back. I hope he's going to be back. Hello.
I don't know what happened there.
Did that happen last week? Where you just kind of like randomly dropped out?
No, and it's weird because I was looking. I was just like, I don't know what happened there. But I mean, I've got a solid connection. I've got the best internet service my ISP provides. So I don't know. I blame StreamYards.
I do too. I'm going to turn you up a little bit because you are coming through a little quiet. So I'm going to.
See, it's funny. So for everybody who's listening, last week apparently my mic was super loud, and I told Jefferson this morning that I listened back to the last stream and it was loud, and I threw Praise I Am right under the bus because I was on his channel the day before, and for whatever reason his StreamYard wasn't working too great, and so he's like, "Can you turn yourself up?" And I had to turn myself back. I had to go to 11 essentially. So. It's either Prace's fault or God's fault.
Okay. I'm gonna yeah. I'll blame Praise. As an atheist, I'll blame Praise until his God can be demonstrated, and then I'll blame his God. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I just popped over and took a look at it on the live side and turned the volume up. I think you're sounding okay. So not too loud, not too muted. So awesome. All right, folks, here we go. We're going to jump right back in. This is about the 47-minute mark. It's probably back a few seconds, but this is right in the middle of the conversation. So once we get caught up here and figure out where our place is, we'll probably stop, and then Micheal can kind of catch us all up.
That it is. But it doesn't make sense. And not just doesn't make sense to me, Robin, but if you have a being that has perfect foreknowledge, this being knew before it happened what was going to happen.
Right. So
that's like
for a second, Justin. Right. So this was just after I had brought up Genesis 6:6. So Robin had asked me the reasons why, the reasons I'm an atheist and stuff like that. So I talked about, the Bible.
Yeah.
The Bible, the evidential problem of evil, and evolution. And so I gave him an example of Genesis 6:6, where God regretted making people before he decides to etch a sketch them out of existence. And he went through several different Bible verses, and I think you had looked up a couple of kind of on the fly as well. And because he tried to say, that God was grieved, right? Many of the translations say regretted. Not that, grieved and regret, I think, is almost a synonym. So it didn't really matter. But so that's what we're talking about here, is basically how this being with perfect foreknowledge, how it's contradictory for this God to regret something he already knew was going to happen. That doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, I think that's one of the bigger contradictions that comes up, I think, between skeptics and Christians when they're talking about any of God's properties. And it seems to be the one where, in my little bit of experience, I've noticed that, like, some of the strongest pushback, some of the harshest reactions from believers, like, no, that doesn't, they don't want to think about, especially if they're not Calvinists, they don't want to think about the fact that this all-knowing aspect of it sort of kind of entails a determinism, and they don't want to think about that. They don't want to think of a God prejudging people. And there's actually somebody, God, I think it was that Smoky Saint guy. I think he has an argument talking about how that's actually a non-biblical and what's the word he used? Probably perverse interpretation of it, because it would be wrong for God morally to prejudge people before they do something. And it's like, yeah, but he made you with all your capacities, and so he would understand what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. So that whole thing, that really does throw off a lot of different Christians. And if you want to see some really interesting, almost hair-raising arguments between believers, watch them talk about that. It gets a little fraught. So
I think Smokey actually uses the term heretical when he refers to that. I should also just drop in a little thing. Smokey and I are going to be having a discussion on Praise's channel in a couple of weeks about morality. So those are always fun.
Thumbs up. I'll be there. Good.
I don't know how Christians argue morality, but whatever.
I recommend taking a sedative or smoking a great big bowl of weed or something, whatever you know, 22-ounce glass of wine. Just
it'll actually be our fourth quote unquote debate. I did three with Smokey and John Maddox, who have since fallen out of love with each other, on Modern Day Debate a couple of years ago with Stephen Ryan.
With Stephen, yeah, I think I saw you guys' first one, or most of it, because I think it was on a weekend.
Yeah.
And weekends are usually, like I usually tell people, weekends can be bad for me, especially later into the evening. I'm usually hanging out with my brother, and he's trying to show me like cult movies and horror films and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't think I saw the other two.
Progressively dumpster fiery, like more dumpster fiery.
And that's kind of what I figured, especially with not so much just like, I expect that out of Smokey, but if I remember correctly, when I was watching it, John Maddox was the one that was really kind of setting my teeth on edge. He was just, I just thought he was being, like, towards the end of it, I thought he was just being kind of like, there's something about the tone of his voice. Even if he sounds like he's trying to be reasonable and conciliatory, he just comes across as a patronizing dickhead.
Yeah, and now he and I have had a come to Jesus moment where we've actually we actually converse pretty well back and forth with each other now. And he really, I think he separated himself. So when the whole issue with Smokey came out about the allegations that were against him,
mm-hmm.
John pulled away. Like he ghosted Smokey pretty hard, pretty fast.
Wow.
And so there's this whole thing, and now because of Praise's falling out of grace with Donnie from Standing for Truth, and John Maddox has kind of aligned himself with Donnie, and so there's tension there with kind of Smokey and Praise on one side and Donnie and John Maddox on the other. So, and it's funny because as an atheist, like I can talk to anybody, right? So it's like I can jump in and talk to anybody. It doesn't matter. Everybody thinks I'm a ridiculous heretic anyway. But yeah, it is interesting to watch those dynamics. But Smokey has chilled out a little bit because when I was talking to Praise, I'm like, look, I'm not going to have a conversation with Smokey Saint, from a couple of years ago. And he's like, no, he's chilled out a lot. So I watched a few of his discussions, and actually he rails harder against Christians he disagrees with than anybody else. So I can get behind that.
Yeah. And when it comes to that, it's like, okay, well, that's useful.
Yeah, that's useful.
All right, let's get back into this. Oh, I should say, if anybody has any questions for me or for Michael, tag me or Michael. And are you watching this on there? Are you in the live chat, Michael?
No, I can't. The live chat, I'll just be like this the whole time.
Oh, okay.
I won't pay attention to anything else but the live chat's on.
Okay, so if you try to tag Michael, it won't tag him. But tag me if you've got any questions. Just let me know if it's for me or for Michael. But yeah, all right, moving forward. So. Sounds like at this point, I think we're pretty well caught up. This point in the conversation, JRobin and Michael have moved into this discussion about some of God's properties, and this one being one of them, his omniscience. Yeah, so I think Michael's laid out a pretty good position there, or at least a pretty good illustration of where this can go. And I am kind of curious to see, because I don't know if I heard all of this part before. What JRobin's going to say about this, I think, is going to be intriguing. So here we go.
That's like taking your hand and putting a lighter under the palm of your hand and turning the lighter on, and then, oh man, I can't believe that burned my hand. Right? This being knew about
actually, well, to use that analogy, I could put my hand on the fire, knowing full well what's going to happen, and then it actually happens, and I could still be grieved about it. So you actually just defeated your own point. But let's be clear here. Let's be clear. Let's just make sure that we're clear.
Yeah, but there's a little bit of a problem with this, though, and JRobin has a real problem with this. I liked your example, but one of the things that I think it feeds into, especially for Christians, is they have a difficult time understanding the capacity of because I actually heard somebody say this. No. What God, it's like, that if you step out into a street and there's an oncoming truck, that you can be struck by that truck. You don't give them enough time to stop and that kind of thing. And that's sort of what God's like with your nature, right? Like he doesn't know that you're gonna do something terrible, but he kind of like, okay, I'm like, no, that doesn't, like what you're talking about is perfect foreknowledge, being able to predict something, And I'm like,
yeah, and I refined that a little bit. Like Robin cut me off a smidge, but then I go back and I refine it a little bit.
Yeah, but I think it's worth pointing out examples like the one that you gave, because it's good to open up that part of the conversation. Like when you're talking with a Christian, to narrow down, like, what do you think omniscient means? Because if you think it's just like, this God could predict the winner of a horse race, right? Like there are humans that can do that, right? Yeah. Probabilistically, but this God can perfectly do it. And it's like, okay, but he knows everything about the mechanics of the race and the physical conditions of the horses and their stamina and their energy levels at the exact moment of the race and the condition of the rider and all that kind of stuff. Like he could make that guess without having to know the future. It knows, but this being made the future too. It's orchestrated all of it. Yeah. So like
27 seconds into the horse race, Seabiscuit will be 18.4 meters ahead of the other horses. He just knows that to be true.
Yeah.
He just knows it.
Yeah, exactly.
And therein lies the problem.
Right. And that's one of the issues where they want to say like, no, he's, every fact is contingent upon him, but not absolute, because we don't want to hold him responsible for too much, because then it's like, oh, okay, the reason that all those people were able to be killed in a genocide in Northern Africa or in Germany or in Southeast Asia, that was all part of God's plan too. No, he makes people, and some of them have it in them to be genocidal, but he doesn't want them to be genocidal, but he wink knows they'll be genocidal, and it's up to us to pray to him to save him. Like what? No, no, that's not omniscience.
I had an interesting conversation with Matt Slick a time ago, and he uses an interesting apologetic to explain this away. And I'm sure everybody's heard this before. but there's a difference between God's decretive will and God's permissive will.
Yes, I've heard this. Yep.
And that's how a more Matt Slick is a more sophisticated apologist than Robin is. And so when you get a more sophisticated apologist, he can wordsmith in that way and almost like if you drink that Kool-Aid, then you will be like, oh yeah, I guess that's a thing, right? You think about it for 5 seconds, you realize how silly it is. But Robin's not that sophisticated.
Right. Yeah. And I think when Robin does get into some of those theological terms, I'm always a little bit worried because he, like I said in the video yesterday, and I've mentioned this a couple of times about him, he had announced in a video like a little over a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, that he'd gotten into the notion of like divine simplicity, which can get into some heady stuff philosophically and theologically, depending on either discipline you approach it from. And the way that he's just sort of like deals with it, he kind of accepts it, but it's really clear he doesn't understand it. I could see him picking up Matt Slick's words, using those, and maybe not understanding, the full ramifications of where they might go. But I've seen Matt Slick do that too. So
yeah, I don't understand the concept of divine simplicity. It doesn't compute for me. It's just like the being you're talking about, the being you believe in, is infinitely complex in its capacity, and you're saying somehow infinite complexity means ultimate simplicity.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I weigh in on it, because it is a very complex thing to try to like philosophically do, and they're just like, oh well, no, all these things are God, and it seems to me like it's designed to kind of philosophically hand wave a bunch of problems away about God. But to me, it just sort of gets into, it seems like the temptation is real for a Christian to just kind of turn that God into some kind of like the Force or something like that, almost like a pantheism or panentheistic kind of thing. Well, more like panentheism, where it's this transcendent being outside of the universe, and it, yeah, or you're actually kind of deifying truth, beauty, knowledge, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know why that would be a problem either, but they're like, no, that's idolatry. And don't you realize those things are God according to the doctrine of divine simplicity? Like,
yeah.
No, I don't get it. Like, it just sounds like you're just equating this God with every good thing and making sure not to equate him with every bad thing, and then piecing out and saying, all right, no.
That's right. It's funny. If any of the listeners, they go into Clubhouse, and there's this room called Ask a Christian, and Roy and Nate run that room. And Roy, I heard him say this for the first time several weeks ago. He was asking me about something, and he said, "Do you believe truth is a person?" And I'm like, "No, that's dumb, Roy. Of course not." And he's like, "Well, it's like, I know where you plant your flag." I'm like, "You knew where I planted my flag weeks ago. I've always told you I'm an atheist." And because he believes truth is a person, being Jesus, right? And I'm like, that's not a thing, Roy. But it goes back to what you said a second ago. Deifying truth, knowledge, and all these other things, right? When you call truth a person, like, that's okay.
Yeah, and I don't think that anybody from the outside in can look at that and be like, oh, so you just worship truth then, or Jesus represents, the physical embodiment of all these great things and is those great things too. Like, okay, so he adheres to those standards because he is the standard. That seems redundant and possibly catastrophic, right? And then Christians are like, you just need more faith to get it, and then walk away in a huff. Like, you're right, I would need more faith to get that one. So.
Yeah. One of the ones I like to throw out then is I throw out Luke 14:26, where Jesus said that if you come to me and don't, hate your mother, hate your father, blah, 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 and in fact, hate your own life, you can't be my disciple. And I'm like, so this is this being that's love and truth and understanding and peace, but you can't be my disciple unless you hate everything.
Right.
And the apologetic that gets commonly tossed at that is to say, no, you don't, the pat on the head, you just don't understand. You have to hate everything. You have to hate everything by comparison of loving Jesus. I'm like, well, that's an interesting interpretation, but that's not what the text says. And especially when you're talking to someone who's a hyper literalist, right? 6 days, 6,000 years, ark is totally true, zombie Jesus back from the dead, But no, but look, this was just a metaphor.
Right.
It's just like, no, man, you're apologetics. You're tripping over your apologetics.
Yeah, exactly. All right, here we go.
Here,
Go ahead.
you made the case. The whole reason we're even talking about this is because this is a part of your case for the
Yes, it is.
falsity of
Part
God.
of
It's
my
not about
theory.
you. It's not about you merely disbelieving. It's not about you merely being unconvinced. You said positively that the Christian God does not exist. That's what your position is, and this is one of your lines of reasoning. So this line of reasoning is going to have to be necessitated that being grieved or being sorrowful about a certain state of affairs is
Sorry,
incompatible
Robin.
with being omniscient.
Robin, sorry,
You have to necessitate that.
Sorry, my phone rang.
Mm-hmm.
My phone rang, so I missed everything you just said. I apologize.
Okay, I'll say it again. It's really quick. It's not merely about you being you holding to, I'm unconvinced or I merely don't believe. You believe positively that God does not exist, and when I ask you to demonstrate that, this is one of the lines of reasoning you gave, right?
Mhm.
So what you're gonna have to do is necessitate that being sorrowful or being grief stricken about something that you have knowledge of is incompatible with being omniscient. Now
I do want to point out here, what he's asking you to prove is different than what you said, and this is something that I pointed out to him, but he wasn't paying attention. When your claim is you believe gods don't exist, and then he wants you to justify that, and then what he's actually, and he's laying this out here. What he wants you to lay out is not the justifications for or your reasons why you don't believe. He wants to know why God's impossible.
Yeah.
That's not the same thing. And
Yeah.
he does this bait and switch with absolutely everyone I've heard him talk with in the last 6 months at least. And that is not honest, because either he's being very dishonest about this or he is just not paying attention. He's just so blinkered into going with this particular apologetic that he thinks is just kick ass. He doesn't realize how silly this is. Like, if your reason for not believing in God is that gods are stupid, that's your reason. That justifies your reason for believing. There's nothing irrational about that. Like, I've heard the claims. I think they seem ridiculous to me. I'm not convinced. That's it. Like, okay, well, why don't you tell me why it's the case that God doesn't exist? And that's a separate conversation.
It is a separate conversation, but it's not completely. And I would say that if when Robin is talking to 95% of the atheists out there, he's wrong, and I would say borderline dishonest for making this argument as he does. But I take a very, very strong stance. Like given the philosophical principle of fallibilism, right, that we can have knowledge without absolute certainty. I know the Christian God doesn't exist, and the reason I can say that and take such a hard stance, and that's why I'm agreeing more. I'm being okay with Robin asking me these questions, because if the Bible is the inerrant, perfect word of the Creator of all things, which Robin believes is true, and these things, and we can look at the Bible, and we can look at the things that the Bible says, and then we can declare that God doesn't exist. Like this God does not comport with reality. This God is contradictory, and this God doesn't exist. So I think when Robin's talking to most atheists, I agree with you. But when he's talking to me, I actually cut him some slack here, because I do take that very, very hard line. The Christian God does not exist. I believe that wholeheartedly.
Okay. Yeah. No, and I think that's probably fair, because I think that's probably where I would have to go to if I wanted to be charitable with JRobin. I'd have to do it too, because mine is a harder stance.
Yeah.
I just think it's, but it is important to point out to anybody listening, especially if this is their first time hearing JRobin lay this out this explicitly. Like, he's literally, because at this point he's telling you, hey, I want to know why you say that. So you're willing to engage that. But for a lot of other people, it's like, look, I think it's important for people, if they do engage him, to understand there is a difference there. And JRobin doesn't really care why. He doesn't care what you believe. Well, I mean, he cares that you don't agree with him, but what he's looking for is an argument against God, a slam dunk argument for why his God specifically is impossible.
And the most dishonest thing, in my opinion, of how people like Robin and Dee and stuff like that approach this, is they start out and they want to live in vague town, like what I call vague town USA, right? Which is God who's just ultimate in the mind, right? But see, I won't declare, and I said this earlier in this conversation with Robin, like that God is unfalsifiable. I can't know that God doesn't exist. But if you want to get specific, Robin, let's get specific. And that's why I said that earlier, like, let's get specific. Let's hammer this down to the God that I can tell you that I know doesn't exist. And so he's, he goes into Christianity, but then he starts to then with what you just said and where you stopped the video is he floats back to, show me how God's impossible. And so it is this continuum that he likes to slide along, this continuum of dishonesty that he likes to slide along. And that's why I think it's important for anyone who's going to engage with him or people of his ilk to get specific, get hyper specific. Yeah. Get him to defend the God he believes in. And then it's easy. Then it's easy.
I would be fascinated if we would ever see an individual actually break through to JRobin and have him acknowledge there's a difference between me justifying what I believe in and why I believe it versus justifying the non-existence of the thing, right? Like and other than to appeal to things like category errors, like he does when somebody brings up like, well, I don't think Bigfoot's a thing, but I can't prove to you that it doesn't exist. In category error, that's a contingent thing. If it does exist, it exists because the creator God made it. Like, oh my God. Yeah. All right, here we go.
It seems as though it's not going to be a possible test because you just gave an analogy and it just backfired again.
Well, so I think the best thing we can do with this is, so you think it backfired against me.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so is there a contradiction with me saying that I put my hand on the fire, knowing full well I'm going to get burned, and then I get burned and I'm sorry about it? Is that a contradiction? Is that impossible to happen?
Not for you.
Is that impossible?
Not for you.
That's a childish and dishonest answer. Can you
answer?
No, it's not.
Please? Why is it childish and dishonest?
I'm saying not for me. I didn't ask you about for me. I asked you, can you is it possible?
Oh, okay. So not for, so I guess your worldview, quote unquote, doesn't matter now? That's an interesting admission.
That's along the continuum, right?
Mm-hmm.
He will jump in and out of, like I said last week, right? He's not shifting the goalposts. He's picking both of them up and running around the field with them.
Yep. Yeah. No. Yeah. That's a good example. Clubhouse debates: either God exists or no God exists. I don't know. I didn't ask you what you know. Okay. I don't believe God exists. How do you know that? Yeah. Exactly.
And there is that difference, right, between knowledge and belief, right? I will, like, especially when we're talking about the Christian God, I will go that step further and say I know that God doesn't exist, and I'll fight someone tooth and nail on that, because I think I have good justification to, again, under fallibilism, claim that I have knowledge that the Christian God doesn't exist.
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha. Here we go.
For somebody who has full knowledge of the consequences of their actions to still be grieved about the consequences of the state of affairs that ensues. Is that possible?
First of all, we're not talking about knowledge of their actions. We're talking about foreknowledge.
Yeah, I have foreknowledge that if I put my hand on the stove, I have foreknowledge. Listen, I have foreknowledge. Okay, Michael.
But you don't.
Do I not have foreknowledge? So would you go put your hand on the stove right now?
Well, no, but the problem is...
Why not? Why not?
I'll explain.
Because you have foreknowledge of what's going to happen, right?
Well, I'll explain.
So we don't have to play.
Are you going to let me explain?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, for example, if I was going, let's say we're talking about the lighter, the first thing that I use, right, with a lighter. Okay. The lighter may not have fluid in it. The flint may not work. It may spark, but not actually light. If you referred to a campfire, right? So I could go to put my hand over the campfire, and wind could blow the flame, so that it doesn't burn me the same way. The problem is the difference between you and this all-powerful, all-knowing, omniscient God is that he knew with perfect foreknowledge ahead of time precisely what was going to happen. So that's the difference between me because I can have a pretty good idea. Like, man, like, because this has happened before, right, Robin? Like, I'm sure you've done something. Everybody has. You've done something that you're like, man, this probably isn't a good idea. I probably shouldn't do this. This is not going to end well, right? And our suspicions were justified, right? Man, that didn't go the way I thought it was. But there may have been situations, I know myself, that I've been in situations like, man, this isn't going to be good, and it actually turned out okay. That's the exception and not the rule, but it happens. The difference between you, and that's why I said the difference between you and God. The difference is that God knew about it before he started everything up. He knew about all of it. And like I said to you before, this is not a one issue thing, right? And I've had conversations like this with other believers where I've given, like, oh, give me a reason why you don't think God exists. And I'll say, like, here's a reason. And they've given me what they think is a defeater for the example that I gave them. And they said, oh, I defeated his example, but you know what? He's suppressing the truth and unrighteousness, like it says in Romans 1, because I answered his question and he still doesn't want to believe in God. But the problem is, like I said before, is it's not a one issue thing. It's many things. And that's why I didn't just say one thing, but I just used this one thing as an example. You don't think that it's an issue. I disagree with you. And the audience can decide. And the ones who are here that, like you, will side with you and say, oh man, he botched that. You killed it. And the people who don't agree with you may see it differently. And there may be people that look at me or message me in the back channel and say, man, you really messed that up. And which is fine. That's fine. But the person, you're talking to one person right now, me, and I'm telling you how I feel. And I understand that you thought that my answer was dishonest, but I committed to you at the start of this to being honest with you. And I have been honest with you in every single solitary thing that I said.
Michael, you brought.
I'm sorry to ramble. Please go on for a while.
Yeah, you brought this verse up, not me, right?
Yeah, so we can talk about something else if you want.
That's after everything that you said there, he immediately wants to shift blame to you on bringing up a verse. Like, yeah. I don't think JRobin is capable of taking correction. He's definitely not willing to take it from anybody that he believes is in a category that his belief system says he has to disagree with, right?
I don't think he understands. Like, when I said that it's so if somebody says, why do you think the God of the Bible doesn't exist? And when I say it's a cumulative case, like, it's a bunch of reasons. Like I said in the first video, like, the Bible is stupid, right? The Bible is stupid, but it's not just Genesis 6:6. There's a fucking plethora of examples of Bible verses that are stupid. Joshua 10, where the sun stands still in the sky. Completely impossible, people. Completely impossible. I don't care what you think. That's not possible unless you presuppose this God exists, right? That's another example. So it's a cumulative case of at least 100 things that the Bible says that do not comport to reality. But he's going to pick on this one thing, right? And if I had 12 hours to sit down and talk with JRobin with enough alcohol and enough examples of the Bible, I could give him my cumulative case as to why.
Yeah.
But he's hyper focusing on this one thing and said, oh, this one thing. Just like I've spoken with other Christians, I said, he gave me his reason why he thinks God doesn't exist. And I think I've answered that question, but he still won't believe. It's like, it's not one thing.
Right. And I think I think what makes this interesting from a believer's perspective, right, is that if someone is listening to this, like, I mean, I'm getting kind of jaded, hearing JRobin's like kind of his takes on stuff at this point. But I think if you're relatively new to the faith, and you're coming into this, and you might be having trouble with notions of God's omnipotence and omniscience and omnipresence and that kind of stuff, and you hear somebody like, I'm pretty sure JRobin has said he's been a Christian for a long time. I don't know if he's a relatively new convert. From the sounds of it, he's in his 20s. He might be one of these guys that wasn't really that active in it and got into it in his early 20s. In my experience, men especially that do that, they're worth watching out for, because more than likely, and it just seems to me like they're inclined to act like they're getting radicalized. But this is a concept that is really important in trying to understand apologetics, and what JRobin is doing here is actually quite dishonest, because these guys will claim that you're making a category error if you try to compare the reasons you disbelieve in God with the reasons you disbelieve in something else that's unproven, and say, well, this God is the necessary foundation of everything that exists, and upon which all facts are contingent. But then the one thing that they don't want to admit to is that the future, if it's a fact, or future events, if they're a fact, and they are a fact to a non-temporal being, a non-temporal, non-spatial being that they believe in, the future isn't something that it has foreknowledge of. It's not existing in a temporal stance with us, so it's not experiencing time. Future events to that being have already happened, are happening, and will happen all at the same time. And he's a tenseless being. So appealing to something like the human capacity for foreknowledge is anachronistic and is dishonest. JRobin and company need to stop doing that. That is a category error if they want to say that this God has properties A through Z, and then say, oh, well, it's just like you or me. We know not to cross the street when the traffic's busy. No. The traffic exists because of God. The street exists because of God. The world exists because of that time and place and set of circumstances. All are there because God made it.
Yeah. And it's funny, when I'm feeling more antagonistic or argumentative, when someone brings up category error with me, I'll say, no, they're like so unicorns, fairies, all these other things, and God, they're in the same category. And someone will say, what do you mean? I'm like, they're in the category of things that don't exist. Like they're in the category of made up shit.
Yeah.
So it's not a category error. They're all made up.
Right.
Now,
and that's right. And that's where they get things wrong too, because it's like, look, from my worldview, this is a made up thing. So I'm not making a category error. I think this is a concept that people have this is dependent on the imaginations of people. And they're like, no, it's real. Like, I understand that you think it's real, but you and I differ on the fact that you believe that this concept exists in actual reality, and I don't. So when you ask me what's my primary and I'm speaking for myself, what's my primary reason for thinking God does not exist? Because it's made up. It exists in the same way that stories exist, the same way that myths exist, but it doesn't exist as an actual thing, right? Like James Bond is not a person. Tom Sawyer is not a person in reality. They're characters in a story. When I tell believers that, they get upset. So
it reminds me of something that Aaron Ra talks about in his book, Foundational Falsehoods. He said, I know God doesn't exist the same way I know Spider-Man, Bugs Bunny, and the Roadrunner don't exist.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. And I think for a lot of people that are on the kind of the non-belief side, that kind of no, quote unquote, is usually enough. Like and I don't understand why either a lot of believers don't realize it's as simple as that. It's not being communicated clearly to them, or they just want to reject that basic idea. Like, the basic difference between skeptics and believers is that believers think it's actually real, and skeptics think that it might be, that it's fake, it's made up, it's imagined, whatever. Like, they can acknowledge the faith tradition, real, the books about that stuff, real, followers and professors of that belief, all real, all that stuff is real. The actual thing they're professing to be real, the God that's responsible for all this stuff, probably fake, probably made up. Very real to the believers, but not actually real. And that's really not that complicated. I think that gets missed in some of these conversations, but and thanks to the way JRobin engages in these conversations, that confusion is going to continue. So take that, JRobin. Sorry. I just wanted to throw in. I do like this comment. Horse gods are real. And somebody asked, I was just highlighting it. Darth did come into one of my streams, and Tom Rabbit turned it into a video. He came in because he wanted to know what my contention was with some of the stuff. So if you're interested in that, I think that's about 8 months ago, something like that. It's on his channel. It's not a long video. I think it's like 15 minutes long. I'm mostly just ripping into him and insulting him. That was back in the days when Canadian Catholic would keep him like yeah, and would like he'd wrangle a AAA talent in the philosophy world, and then at some point during their discussion, like, hey, I know this lunatic Darth Dawkins, he'd like to ask you some questions, and then it would just come unglued.
Ever tell you my experience with Canadian Catholic?
No, but please do.
So I get an email from Canadian Catholic, and the subject line is important, please read. So I'm like, okay. So he says, I'd really like to have a discussion with you. Can you please get back to me? Please come on my YouTube channel to have a discussion. Like, I have no idea who you are. But I'm like, sure, why not? So I research him a little bit, and I see some of the things that he was puppeting some of the things that Double D was doing. Like, when Double D would get upset and be like, dude, stuff like that. And so Canadian Catholic was doing that kind of stuff. And so going into the conversation, well, the first thing, so I join his broadcast, and the second I log in, like the second I go in before we go live, he's like, I just do me a favor, go subscribe to my channel. I just lost 1 subscriber. Can you go subscribe, please? I shit you not.
Wow.
Okay. Because whatever it was, it dropped him below 500. And I guess that was an important number for him. So I'm like, all right. So I subscribe to his channel, and then we go live, and he starts talking about this whole, like his beliefs on, classical theism. And he tries to argue for this general theistic thing. And I'm like, but you're a Catholic, you're a Christian. And then I'm trying to talk to him. And at one point he asks me to define some of these terms, these deeper philosophical terms. I'm not a philosopher, and I wasn't familiar with them. So he's like, do me a favor, hold your hands up like this. I'm like, what, are we praying now? But he's like, hold your hands up. And he's like, and he asks me the definition of a couple of terms. I'm like, I have no idea. Like, these are deeper philosophical terms I wasn't familiar with. And I'm like, why did you ask me to hold my hands up? And he's like, so I knew you wouldn't be Googling them as we were talking. I'm like, you think I'm that fucking dishonest? Like, I can admit I don't know lots of shit. There's way more shit I don't know than shit that I do know. So thanks for having so much faith in me. And then he goes right down as I'm trying to talk, he's like, dude. And I'm like, I told you if you're going to start this DD shit, I'm not going to take it. And he kept on going with it. I'm like, I got better shit to do with my time. Go fuck yourself. And I left the broadcast. And I said way more stuff than that because it was a Christian broadcast. I'm like, like tickle my balls, like, blah, 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 blah. And then he sends me this email asking me to come back. And I just ripped into him in this email. And I'm like, I'm not going to come back on. I told you I didn't want to deal with that kind of bullshit. I was happy to have a conversation with you, but I wasn't going to go down this path. And I said, please don't embarrass yourself by responding to this email, or I'm going to post it on every outlet in social media. And he never responded to that email.
Oh, that's good.
We haven't spoken since.
Yeah, I don't have much of a story on him. But when I was following some of that stuff and those Tom Rabbit videos, and I was doing reaction videos to him, at one point he went live one night, and it was I don't remember why, but he'd gone live. He didn't have a lot of viewers going on. He opened up his stream, and I think this was like late last summer, kind of when my channel started kind of picking up. And I had a cool drink in my hand, so I'm just sitting back, and I was like, all right, I'll join him because I've been profiling, reacting to a lot of videos he's been in. So I jumped in there, and I didn't go in hot. I didn't go in expecting anything contentious or anything. I get in there, and he starts quizzing me about something, and I would show it to people if I could, but I get on there and I try to answer his question as best I could, and he just lost his mind. He just got enraged at me. Screamed at me that I was a liar. And I was like, I'm not lying. I'm answering your question as best I can, unless you want to like get into it and maybe break it down, and he's like, no, you're being dishonest. And it went on like that for a little bit. And I'm just kind of sitting there, with, I don't think I was on camera, but I was, if I had been, I would have just been giving him the skunk eye. Like, what is, like, what's going on? He loses it, kicks me, just flies off into a rage, then continues to go on this temper tantrum about how disgustingly dishonest I was, just like a little mini Smokey Saint moment. Wow. And then shortly after that, I don't know if I was still watching even, he ends the stream within like 5-10 minutes after that, and then it disappears.
Yeah.
He just took it off. I'm like, what in the? And he was known for doing that kind of thing. He'd do an hour and a half long video and then just private it, and people would be like, Cece, what the hell are you doing? Like, you do these videos and then you bin them, and you wonder why you've only got a few hundred subscribers. And I was like, well, I think that's why, because he looks at some of them and they're like, oh, he's maybe a little self-conscious about how he comes across. He definitely lost it with me. That was the last time I talked with him. I'm like, and I've never had any interest in engaging with him, and now Nathan Orman from Digital Gnosis is following him around, kind of, because CC's back and he's trolling people with a sock account named Marjorie. Yeah. That dude is not.
And the exposure to him, like I don't have time for that.
Yeah, he's just there's a lot of issues there that I don't think that I don't want to try to diagnose remotely. Well, I mean, I diagnose remotely all the time when it comes to Darth and JRobin, but I think in his case, I think he's got some issues going on, and like social media is like not a healthy place for him to be.
And maybe I should bring up my DSM. I got my DSM sitting on the shelf over there.
Yeah, just go through like, this is you, probably. All right, let's get back into this video. But yeah, no, thanks for that. Sorry for the tangent, folks, but I will never turn down hearing a Canadian Catholic story, ever. So thank you for that, Michael.
No problem.
Okay. Is this verse intended to be a falsifier for the existence of the Christian God?
No, it's one of the reasons I don't believe.
No. Okay. Are you able to present? Because no, it's not an issue of you merely not believing. You told me that the Christian God
yeah,
does
for sure.
not.
Yeah.
Are you able to provide? So this really isn't going to get you anywhere. Are you able to provide for me something that is going to falsify the Christian God that we can actually talk about, that has meat on it?
Sure. Is the Bible the perfect inerrant word of God?
Yes.
Okay. That's all we need. Okay. Human beings are not there were never ever two human beings. That is a fairy tale that is made up. That in and of itself, where it says God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. That is not possible. That in and of itself, if the Bible is perfect, that is wrong. We know for sure that's wrong. Every single solitary field, Robin, of earth and life sciences all come to they all converge on the same fact that we are animals, that we are primates, and that we positively evolved through a lengthy process taking billions of years. That in and of itself, if the Bible is inerrant, completely falsifies the God of the Bible.
Okay, how did you determine that the story of Genesis is false?
I'm surprised he's asking that simple a question, because a lot of Christians would end up going with because this doesn't really reveal a lot about JRobin's take on this, because there's two or three different types of biblical inerrantists. There are the biblical inerrantists that are like the literalists or the biblicists. And then there are the ones that are more like the kind of Catholic Vatican II kind of biblical inerrantists, where everything that the Bible is saying in terms of its salvation message and covenant relationships of God, or whatever, they probably don't get into covenant relationships, they're Catholic. But that is true, even though these books were written by men and may contain factual or historical errors or omissions and things like that. So I think the Catholic Church with that kind of takes a much more measured and careful approach, and that's actually more defensible, because they can always just say, look, these were inspired by God, two people make mistakes when they write things, sometimes the message gets garbled, but the overall message is what we believe is inerrant, that Jesus is Lord and he died for our sins, and then God will return, and all that good gospel stuff. JRobin hadn't actually clarified his position on that, and I think what you've staked out is you're actually open if he is of the Catholic kind of persuasion. Your position, which I think is a strong one, is really open to attack from that kind of believer, because it'd be like, yeah, no, there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of metaphor going on there, and a
Yeah.
lot of weird language and all that kind of stuff. So I don't believe that that's literally true, but I believe that the message that it represents about God's initial relationship with mankind and stuff, like that's what I believe is inerrant. JRobin doesn't say that. Instead, he's just he wants to know, yeah. And instead of this, and this is where he's getting back into this problem with the precept script, where it used to be about you being able to account for the laws of logic and stuff, and now he wants to know, well, can you even make that judgment about the book of Genesis in any real way if you don't believe in God?
Yeah,
like
and
that kind of basic.
Yeah, part of the problem you were saying about the whole Catholic thing is because I've had that discussion with those types of people. And the Catholics who say, well, Genesis, metaphorical, not literal, blah blah blah. The problem that with Christians like who believe that kind of stuff, the problem they run into is, and the question that I ask them is, please tell me how you determined, like after reading the Bible and going through these pieces, please tell me how you determined what was metaphorical versus what was literal.
Right.
So. So dirt, dust man and rib woman. Yeah, that probably didn't happen. Global flood, maybe not. Dead Jew comes back to life, totally. Right. Please tell me how you determined these things, right? And that's it's of course that's an answer. It's faith or it's whatever, but there's never any, like what JRobin said a minute ago. Is there any meat to this? There's never going to be any meat on that bone.
Yeah, well, it's sort of like the when that issue comes up, you're exactly right. When somebody is like, well, okay, the Amalekites getting slaughtered by the Israelites and that being God's, well, all right, there's a little bit of hyperbolic language going on there. There's a little bit of saber rattling, and this is what we would expect. But the overall inerrant, like, okay, so sometimes it's hyperbolic language, sometimes it's radically exaggerated metaphor, and yet death, resurrection, and ascension to heaven.
Yeah.
Go.
Bodily.
Oh, yeah.
Body floating up to heaven. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, what's funny too is when they say, okay, so was it literally real when Elijah was ascended to heaven on a chariot?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that might be metaphor or something like that. But Jesus, no, totes happened.
Yeah,
totally happened that way, 100%. I mean, it was like it was reported by the Associated Press. I mean, there's no no reason for doubt. Like
the problem they run into is that had to happen.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they don't have Christianity.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you put it that way, because I think that's actually that's a good point, because like, oh no, that has to happen for our belief, but this other stuff that's super important, if you're reading the Old Testament, that stuff you can kind of take or leave whether or not it's literally true or not, like because it doesn't add to the story of Jesus. So we can kind of downplay it and say, oh well, that's war rhetoric and hyperbolic language. Like, okay, well, given the fact that this is special revelation and God wants you to know this, do you think that kind of language is beneficial to what he's trying to get across? You'd think he wouldn't be inspiring the writers in this kind of sloppy way, but whatever.
And the whole inspiration thing is slippery, because the Bible says all scripture is God breathed and suitable for teaching and instruction and reproof, or whatever the verse says, in all things. Right. So if these things are true, part of me wants to be, because you hear a lot of believers saying this sometimes. Oh, you're cherry picking, and I'm like motherfucker, you're cherry picking. Like you are saying that all scripture is God breathed and suitable for teaching. And the Bible's a perfect and inerrant word of God. But that was metaphor, and this totally happened.
And they also say, oh well, if you really want to know more, all you have to do is just pick it up and read it, and the Holy Spirit will guide you. Like, and if it doesn't, oh well, I hope you don't get too confused about those parts, like here. It's all metaphor with Babel literalists until they get to the parts about homosexuals and witches have to be killed. Yeah, exactly. Like, which parts do you take literally and which parts don't? The bitter waters thing, the sota.
Yeah.
I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Like that's obviously, for a lot of people, it's like, and for people that are into Old Testament critical scholarship, especially on like the Jewish side of things, when they're studying, they're like, that's problematic even for them. Like, yeah, we don't know where it came from. It's really super old. It's part of a tradition, and they threw it in there, so they obviously preserved it for some reason. Do we think it ever actually happened? We don't know. So there's lots of different like critical wranglings about how this happened. But when it comes to Christians, they're just like, oh yeah, well. No, there's some magic talk and exaggeration stuff. I'm like, that's not important.
Yeah, and I have so much respect for someone who can look at me when I pose a question to them or something like that. And they say, you know what, I don't know about that.
Right. Exactly.
But I'm always more hypercritical of the person who says, no, I do know, and it's this, right? And that's when I start getting. That's where sometimes I know I'm guilty sometimes of getting a little bit soundbitey. And quoting people like Aaron Ra, who will say, knowledge is demonstrable with measurable accuracy. If you can't show it, you don't know it, right? Yeah. Show me the truth of what it is you are saying is true. Because if you can't show me that it's true, it's not true. If truth, with a correspondence theory, right? Truth is that which comports to reality. If you can't show me the truth of this, then we'll get more soundbitey and say that which can be asserted without evidence could be dismissed without evidence. I have it fucking tattooed on my arm. So
I do want to point out, because I didn't notice this before, and I probably should have. I don't know that this really needs to be said, but I do want to point it out because it bothers me. This would have been visible on the last one too when we had this up. So I wasn't able to record this because it was just on Clubhouse Replay, and I wasn't able to use OBS, fire up OBS to record this. My brother was nice enough to do this for me, and the way Club Deck works, it opens up the screens. It's kind of a hacked app kind of thing, right. And it's laying this out. So it's got this thing on here. There's a group in here to the left of the main one that Micheal and JRobin are in. It's regarding trans women are not women, #mental illness. I just want to say that was probably a fucked up room. And I don't think rooms like, I mean, this one's regarding that. So I think those are comments to whoever was doing that. Clubhouse rooms can get a little fucked up. So yeah, I neither affirm nor endorse the opinions of that particular thing. So yeah, just to say that.
Robin and some of his other compatriots are particularly lately, they've been going after this woman, Brenda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's disgusting, and it's a cheap shot, and she's a human being, and the fact that they don't understand this kind of stuff, but they have absolutely no problem like just kicking dirt on her because
misgendering and all that stuff. Yeah.
For the Bible tells me so. Yeah, that's
garbage humans. Yeah.
Yep. And the Bible doesn't tell you to do that. They have a bunch of things that they assume about transgendered people. They lump that stuff in there, and they're like, oh, well, according to the Bible, I can scorn the sinner. Like, yeah, you can, but maybe you shouldn't. And you can show like, if Brenda is a sinner in your worldview, if you're accurate about that, that doesn't mean you have to treat her like shit.
You are actually biblically commanded to love your neighbor.
Yeah, regardless. So yeah, you kind of have to balance that stuff out. Does the Bible say contradictory things about those things sometimes? Like, yes, like when I think, what is it, when you get into Hebrews and you're not supposed to associate with them. You're not supposed to associate with the sinner. I'm like, okay, but not dining with someone or not hanging out with them and having beers with them is very different than insulting them in social media. So the fact that JRobin and others think it's their God ordained duty to kick people, just to abuse people like this verbally is disgusting.
Yeah. And Jesus didn't hang with the converted like he had his disciples, but Jesus hung with the sinner, right? If all the stories are true, he hung out with the sinner.
Right. Yeah. And if it's true that Brenda is a sinner, then Jesus would have been hanging out with some people. And that's the thing. I mean, if Jesus' ministry was happening now instead of in the first century, he would be hanging out with people that JRobin would be enraged to see him chilling with. Exactly. So yeah.
He spent a lot of time in San Francisco, right? And the Village in Toronto. For anyone who's not familiar, the Village is in Toronto is that there's a very large LGBT community there, and they've kind of they've nicknamed it the Village, right? Those are places, not exclusively where he'd be spending his time, obviously, but those are places he'd be spending time, right? Because he would be preaching the good news to the sinner, right? In hopes of getting them saved.
Exactly. Yeah. And the funnier thing would be like if Jesus just shows up and he's like, that's not a sin at all. Jesus is poly. I mean, then JRobin would be like, "Yep, I'm converting to Islam."
That would be hysterical.
All right, here we go.
I just told you. Like, if you have, honestly, Robin, if you have what it takes to take down the theory of evolution, then what I would suggest you do is drop out of this conversation, okay? And submit your findings for peer review, okay? But get ready, Robin, because you are going to be so famous, so fast, it's going to make your head spin. Chemistry, biology, biochemistry, genetics, phylogenetics, geology, everything, all of the earth and life sciences all converge on the same conclusion. Robin, you are a primate. I am a primate. We evolved. Period. End of sentence.
Them's fighting words, Michael.
Happens to be a fact. So
they are. Here we.
yeah,
And it doesn't matter.
These are nice claims. These are nice claims. I get it. Okay.
Well, let me throw one at you. Do you have a falsifier for evolution? I'd love to hear it.
Well, the interpretation of the Bible that is just a plain reading would be the falsifier. Now, there are people who interpret the Bible differently.
No.
Yeah.
No. I don't know how JRobin. I mean, I've said this before. This kid thinks that he's got 25-pound, a 50-pound testicle, 25-pound balls.
Yeah.
This claim that you can get that you can extract a plain reading refutation of evolution. The plain reading of the Bible is somehow going to refute the theory of evolution. The Bible doesn't even really deal with that. What JRobin means by plain reading is if you read it and are credulous and take every word to be literally true, yes, that automatically starts to deconstruct. It's more than just evolution.
Mm-hmm.
It blows up astronomy, cosmology, biology, chemistry, basic physics, and quantum mechanics regarding space and time. Like, that is not a good idea. And if he is a biblical scholar, if he had been exposed to the Bible, I will say this repeatedly as often as I can, instead of getting exposed to the Bible from theologians and ministers and preachers and churches, if you want, and I recommend this to anybody, if you're curious, get an introduction to the Old Testament. There's good ones out there. A textbook, if you can afford it. John J. Collins has a great one. And Bart Ehrman has a great New Testament introduction to New Testament, which is not very expensive. Grab that, and even if you don't have to read them cover to cover, but just one chapter at a time will completely blow the lid off all this bullshit that JRobin is bringing out. It'll give you an accurate and real appreciation of the books that you're talking about. So you don't have to just take this guy's word for it. Like, well, no, a clear reading of the Bible is obviously going to lead someone to conclude that evolution is false. No, it won't. Because if you're just picking up and reading an English translation of it and trying to take it literally, you are reading wrong. You're not appreciating the text for what it is. And that's not my opinion. That is critical scholarly consensus on how to constructively read and appreciate those texts in context. So, sorry, I'll jump off my soapbox now.
No, you're good, man.
Would still hold to evolution. So even this is a weak argument to begin with. But all I'd have to do is show you. I take the Bible to be literal when it comes to the Genesis, and so I would just say that that's the falsifier. Do you have a problem with that?
Well, yeah, because.
Okay, what's the problem? Are you going to appeal to the scientific method as a falsifier?
No, I'm not appealing to the scientific method. What I'm saying is,
then what are you appealing
to? We know, and I say we, the royal we, the human race, scientists know. Okay, we know, Robin. We know more about evolution than we know about gravity.
Yeah, none of this is. I mean, I mean, I feel like you're just kind of giving me these pre-planned responses. Science more these kind of like talking points, these canned responses. I want to hear a falsifier and answers to my question. I just asked you a question, you didn't answer it. There's two issues here. Okay, you bringing up evolution. That's an interpretational issue of the Bible.
No,
okay?
it's not.
Because
No, it's not.
yes, it is, because there are Christians who have made interpretations of the Bible. Now, I don't hold to those interpretations, but they exist, where they would hold that the old earth and evolution is compatible with Christianity. All right, these people exist. Okay, I'm not one of those people, but they exist.
No, but I'm talking to you,
All right?
and you believe the Bible's the literal truth,
Hold on a minute.
and it's not.
I want to know what you're appealing to make the case that it's necessarily true that evolution occurred, because you're saying that this is a falsifier, right? So falsifiers are out of necessity. So how did you determine that it's necessarily true?
I love this. So when you're pointing out that we know more about evolution than we know about gravity, and just looking at evolution, it automatically shows that an attempt to understand the Genesis accounts literally doesn't hold water. That they're going to butt heads, right?
And it doesn't work for 100 reasons, right?
Yeah, there's just so many reasons why it doesn't. And the problem, so JRobin's in trouble here, because he's one of these guys like, nope, it's 100% literal. It sounds like is how he takes it.
Yeah.
The issue here now, he's appealing. So he's, oh, okay, and you could hear it in the tone of his voice. Are you appearing to some kind of scientific method or scientific methodology to get to get there? Like there's automatically something wrong with that. And now what is he asking? It has to be falsified.
Yeah.
Where does this principle of the importance of falsification come from? Because it doesn't come from faith claims, JRobin. It comes from things like the scientific method. Yeah. So he's at once degrading scientific method as being insufficient to deal with this issue, and now holding Micheal to that standard, like, aha, I got you right where I got you in your wheelhouse. Now now falsify my God, and don't try telling me that we've falsified Genesis. Here's the weirder claim about this, and it needs to be understood in nuance. Evolution does not prove the Genesis account, quote unquote, false. It proves the literal reading of the Genesis accounts false. The literal understanding, the literal interpretation, whatever it happens to be true about the Genesis accounts is true for either cultural reasons or faith tradition reasons, as they've been preserved by Jewish scribes throughout their culture and history, and even by Christian scholars going forward. If you have a nuanced understanding of how these things, and you read them and appreciate them the way that they've been written, what they were intended for, there are lots of scholars that can give great perspective on this, from John J. Collins, Joel Baden, Francesca Stavrakopoulou. They do not just, they like the Old Testament. They respect these writings. They will give you a respectful and nuanced, comprehensive understanding of how to appreciate these writings, rather than doing what JRobin's doing, which is, nope, it's literal, evolution sucks. That's it. Yeah. Right. This is childishness.
And part of one of the things he says is, it's like, are you appealing to the scientific method? Almost like, and I think if we would have kept going down that, he probably would have tried to hang an appeal to authority on me.
Yep.
And but which of course wouldn't hold, right? Because if I was appealing to Richard Carrier or Bart Ehrman about science or biology, like science and biology and stuff like that, that would be an appeal to authority fallacy. Yes. But if I'm appealing to a biologist about biology, someone who's an expert in that field, that is not fallacious, because they're an expert, right?
Yep.
And he didn't end up going down that road anyway. But I just thought it was important to point that out, because I've had people try to do that before. People try to say, oh, that's an appeal to authority. Not when you're citing an expert.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. All right, let's see where he goes next.
That given, let's say my interpretation of the Bible is correct and evolution didn't happen, how did you determine that it's necessarily the case that evolution did in fact happen? Because that's what you need to do. So that's falsify God, right?
Right. So the problem.
That's an interesting thing that he added on. I didn't catch that. I think I heard this part when I was listening to you guys while I was working, because he's like, you would have to prove that in order to, and what does he add on? You'd have to prove that about evolution in order to falsify God. Evolution doesn't falsify God for most believers.
Yeah.
There's lots of believers that acknowledge evolution as a fact and still believe in a higher power. Yeah. And many of them believe in Christ.
Yeah. So, look at Francis Collins.
Right, exactly. Or the woman that you were talking about earlier. There's a lot, and I think there's that group is growing. So yeah, JRobin's way out on a limb here.
That creation has is we have observed not only microevolution but macroevolution. It's a done.
Okay, you know what?
We have
we'll do
observed.
this.
No,
Let's
hang
actually
on.
do this.
We have observed speciation. We have observed Do you know what speciation is, Robin?
Yeah, I know speciation. Speciation is not even compatible is not even incompatible with my worldview. So bringing that up is not really relevant to the discussion. Let's do this.
Sure, it does.
The first step you're gonna.
Okay, he might not be bad if he's trying to talk about, well, and that doesn't make sense. Speciation is the part of evolution that he's objecting to. If he's talking about, I think he might actually think that speciation is like variations in a breed, like different kinds of cows and different kinds of dogs, and that's a kind of microevolution, but they're not different species. They can interbreed. But that speciation process, that dynamic, is definitely a thing that he would have an issue. If he doesn't have an issue with it, he has no real understanding of evolution, not even a basic.
And I thought he was going to go. He doesn't do this, but I remember back to this conversation as I thought he was going to go down the route of kinds. That's where I expected him to go, and he didn't go there. I don't think he went there.
No, yeah, at least not yet.
Have to do, and arguably the most important step, if you're going to even think about trying to necessitate that evolution occurred, can you start by telling me how you know it's the case that that the Earth is more than like 5 minutes old? Do you know that that's true?
Are we going to go to solipsism?
No, I didn't even mention solipsism. Has nothing to do with whether or not the Earth is more than 5 minutes old.
Wait, your whole brain the vat thing? Like, what are you talking
well,
about?
actually, I mean, technically, well, okay, look, this is the point. In order for you to necessitate that evolution in the way that you're talking about it occurred, the very first step is you're going to have to necessitate the existence of the past. Are you willing and able to do that right now?
Sorry, necessitate the existence of the past? I don't even know what you mean by that.
Bro, I'll say that the actuality of the past, that the past actually happened, that there was a succession of events.
This is super weird.
This is bonkers, but Darth does this too. People have told me that Darth does not believe the past exists anymore, right? What's interesting about that claim, though, is that neither one of these guys, when they try to do this, are particularly nuanced about it. Like, okay, the past as far as like linear, but it depends on whether you believe in that type A or type B theory of time. And I think it's the type A theory of time that's the linear one. I'm not great at this, but my question is, does it follow that just because, say, a past event happens and it leads to things happening in currently, the events that happened, that past, quote unquote, no longer exists, but the effects of it are still felt in the present? And that's what you would be talking about if we are in fact experiencing time in that type A tense sense. So I really don't get why. I don't think these guys understand that those kinds of physics arguments well enough to bring this out. So this is always like, I mean, how desperate do you have to be to get into this? Like, okay, well, evolution. Oh, evolution. Is that where you want to go? How do you know that the past is real? Like, seriously, is that what we have to deconstruct in order to get you somewhere?
Yeah. Scientific was famous for doing this, and others, right? But it's funny because my confusion in talking to Robin here was genuine. I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, because like I accept that everybody has, some people call them properly basic beliefs or axioms or presuppositions, right? Accept, like, and one of my starting points is that reality is real, right? And so if reality is real, and I accept that reality is real, then time as we know it, I believe, had a beginning, and it moves forward, and that supermassive gravity can alter space time and stuff like that, but that generally that it moves along a timeline. And so I was just genuinely confused by what he was saying, because I was like, and again, like looking back on it, it's like, is this the length you have to go to? And the problem is that he gets to it like. If we were to follow the bouncing ball in his head all the way down the line, he would just at the end of it wave it off and say, well, because I believe God exists, all this stuff makes sense to me, but it doesn't to you.
Yeah. This stuff is so frustrating because I mean, for him, I don't know. I don't want to chase the time thing again. I've talked enough about that. I don't understand it enough, and I think I don't think that they should be wrestling with this. I mean, even like I don't like a lot of what William Lane Craig's, but like if you're going to talk to somebody who's in like the apologetics camp and you're going to have a conversation about like A and B theory of time, I think he's more reliable to go to. And even I'm not going to look to him. I'm going to go to somebody like Sean Carroll. Like, okay, explain this to me like I'm six. Let's go. Try convince this dummy how these two things work. And these guys have probably heard this stuff in passing in debates where they've watched other apologists like William Lane Craig bring this up, and now they think, okay, well, that's on the menu now. I'm going to use it here, and then ask something so stupid as, well, okay, if you're going to back up evolution, you need to prove time. Like, shut up, just shut up.
Yeah.
I've had people ask me these questions before. Robin, I find it really interesting when people bring up things like and try to pose it as an argument. When
is evolution necessarily true?
When it's things they don't. No, it's not necessarily true. It just happens to be a fact.
No. Okay, then if evolution is not, well,
did you hear my whole sentence, Robin? It isn't necessarily true, but it's a fact. It's what happened.
All right. Yeah, your goal.
I don't have to be overweight, but I am.
Oh, let's put it this way: are you able to necessitate? Are you able to? Okay, let's make sure it's clear. The goal here, right, is for you to necessitate the falsity of God, right? Right, well, you said God does not.
I really don't understand why they use this word necessitate, especially him.
Yeah,
he uses it all the time, and it's. I mean, it really just can you demonstrate how it's necessary as a result of as a result or a consequence? The thing with like evolution, right? Like how would you necessitate that the theory of evolution is true? Because we've seen it happen.
Yeah, and that's why when I said he didn't hear my whole sentence, like it doesn't necessitate it, but it's a fact. Like we have observed it. It's done. Like it's done. And this is why, like, it kind of like I don't argue evolution anymore because I look at it as tantamount to arguing flat Earth.
Right. And it's interesting that he would bring that up because the whole reason for theories like evolution is because, and this is one of those things that they hate, the inductive logical problem, right? People were observing these kinds of changes, the consequences of speciation, and then processing that backward, and that's how we started to derive these theories in biology about the speciation of different things and how they would emerge. It's been observed. Right. Evolution is just the theory of describing the consequences of life adapting and changing over time as it breeds and gets isolated or whatever. So yeah, this is he's way out on a limb here.
Speciation, and he didn't want to go there, right? Like we've observed speciation in the lab, like we've seen it happen. No.
Yeah, he didn't want to do that.
As a matter of fact.
Are you talking about when
God,
you
by
mean,
definition?
Hang on a second. When you say the goal, my goal in having this was to have a dialogue with you. But actually, and I'm not trying to. I want to go back immediately to what it is that you were saying. But this provokes a very interesting question in my mind, and I'd love to hear your answer to this. What's your goal of this conversation?
Well, you invited me up. You back channeled me, and then you invited me to speak to you, and I said okay.
That doesn't matter.
But you don't have a goal
to analyze. Well, the point was to analyze your worldview and then present my worldview. Now, my argument still has been left completely on the wayside. We're talking about something. We're talking about evolution, which really, honestly, this is not.
Evolution was something that JRobin brought up.
Yeah.
He brought that up as a way of basically trying to distract, like, oh, well, how are you gonna prove that my literal interpretation of the Genesis accounts aren't accurate? Are you gonna appeal to evolution? Is that what you're gonna do, science tough guy? Well, how do you prove time? So if anybody's to blame for this thing starting to veer off into lots of different tangents, I mean, this thing is shattering like the MCU multiverse at this point. It's JRobin. He's attempted to veer this into lots of different directions. And
I think his friend Double D would call this going down semi-related rabbit trails.
Yep. He's definitely rabbit holing.
To put it nicely, this is a sympathetic excuse for an argument for the falsity of God, even the Christian God.
Right, but
because you're gonna have to necessitate the actuality of evolution to necessitate the falsity of God, because God either made up.
No, you don't have to do either of those things. Evolution is a theory that the circumstances that it describes, that's what scientific theories do. They're describing actual processes. Those necessitate themselves. The theory is just the observation of that. The fact that I think he believes the theory of evolution is a religion that makes reality so, just like he believes acknowledging the existence of an all-powerful God makes my epistemology work and thus makes the world tick away like a well-operating clock.
That's very a la Kent Hovind, right? The religion of evolution.
Yeah, and it's clear to me when they start talking like that they don't understand it. Like, and it reveals a lot about their kind of goofy epistemology. Like, well, you have to necessitate how this thing holds to. Like, evolution does not make the processes it describes thus and so. The processes are thus and so, and evolution is a scientific theory that describes what is happening and how. Right? Yeah. He's so off base here.
Yeah, but this is the same thing, right? Like, it's like talk to a lot of Christians. Like, I remember having a conversation with Gavin Herleman, and he said he believes God created the laws of logic. And I'm like, and I'm not a logician, right? I fumble around with a lot because I'm not smart enough to get a lot of it. But the laws of logic describe reality, right? And so even if this God wasn't there, the laws of logic are things. It's like, what is it? I think it's Tom Jump who was having the discussion once, and he said, he goes to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and looks up logic, and a formal language invented by people, right? That we invented these things to describe what we see around us, not some being created it.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing too, and JL pointed it out too. JRobin seems to have a problem with this idea that evolution and God are not mutually exclusive, and the evidence for that is not in proving evolution or proving God or proving time to prove evolution or any of that kind of stuff. It's evident in the fact that there's nothing about evolution is only false from a biblicist perspective, and he's the worst kind of biblicist. That literal interpretation, like I read it in English and I take every word to be on the face of it, just true. Blanket, it's just blanketly true, literally true. That's exactly what they mean by it. Yeah. From that perspective, sure, you have a problem with the account that you're getting from so-called special revelation versus what scientists are describing, and that's what evolution is, describing about the world around us. And this is what the problem that JRobin and Darth Dawkins does this too. They have a real problem with this. They are pitting special revelation against general revelation. You cannot turn around. I don't know if JRobin's done this, but guys like Gavin Herleman and others have done this and said, well, the reason that we have scientific advances and scientific progress is because we have these people who are clear-headed and they're believers and they respect God and love God. And that approach gives them the mental fortitude to make all these kinds of scientific advances. Okay, concede that for a fact. That's one kind of Christian perspective. Then what those people are doing, guided by their belief system and probably the effect of the Holy Spirit, are able to study general revelation, what God has created for us, and they can come to these conclusions about evolution and physics and chemistry, etc., and say, these describe what's going on in the world God has given us. And JRobin is coming here and said, it's too easy for people to say this. JRobin believes that evolution is a conspiracy planned by atheists to tell people that God's fake, when in fact it's an accurate description of the general revelation he claims to respect so much, and he's pitting special revelation against general revelation.
Yeah.
That's a major problem for Christians, and that to me right there is probably one that belongs in one of the top 5 reasons, or maybe top 10 reasons why Christianity is dying, at least when it comes to, as it's being defended by apologists in this way. Most people probably wouldn't take it 20 steps deep like I just did, but that to me, that's essentially what he's doing. I respect scientists who are Christians, but a lot of science I disregard if it's anti-God. It's like, it can't be anti-God if it's accurate, because if it's accurately describing the world around us, then it is accurately describing general revelation, which is a part of God.
Yeah.
That's his gift to us. So
that's what Double D says, right? It's like, we see natural revelation. We look at the world around us. Look at the trees.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Why?
Necessarily, because
Why?
God even necessarily exists or necessarily does not exist, because he's metaphysically primary.
He could be metaphysically.
There's no contingent. Well, there's no, to put it this way, there's no derivative or contingent fact that would, by itself, falsify the existence of God. Right?
I'm not sure why you want to take the conversation this way. Why don't we just stick with the things that we were talking about? So what's interesting is you said a second ago, is that, like, so evolution doesn't have to be the way it happened. It doesn't have to be the way it happened. But Robin, it is evidently the way it happened.
You believe God necessarily does not exist, right?
No.
Christian God?
No. Well, hang on. You said God, and then you said Christian God. I answered 2 separate times.
If the Christian God does not exist, then he necessarily doesn't exist.
I'm not sure why that follows.
It's definitional.
I don't need.
Okay, and I want to point this out to anybody, and please check me if I'm wrong, check my logic on this, but I kind of agree with David Hume on this kind of thing. JRobin loves to do this. Okay, yes, it would necessarily logically follow from in an argument that God that he's defining, if it's, in the kind of thing that he's setting it up, either that God exists necessarily or that God is impossible. That's sort of a modal ontological argument for God. The problem with that is that not either way that you go with that, God is impossible or God is necessary. It's just an argument. If you can get the argument to follow and it tracks, okay, you might have something valid there that does not translate to actual reality, and actual reality is not dependent on the necessities implied within the confines of that deductive argument. It's just a deductive argument. So it's like it's in its own little theoretical cage. It trying to, and JRobin tried, and others now. Zen Shapiro does this, and hell, even sometimes Smokey St. Praise do this too. This idea that, okay, well, it's lined up this way, and this is how it works in rhetoric, so this is how it translates to the real world. Wrong. You can make all like the rules of chess do not represent the actual movements of armies in the world, right? It's an abstracted thing. Right, it's logically consistent as long as the rules are met and they're kept and they're preserved. But that does not have any bearing on how like actual kings and queens and their armies would fight. Like that, if like they can understand the difference of that. What you're doing with a logical argument, it might be valid, but proving that whether or not it's sound or it has anything to do with actual reality is a very big jump away from what he's trying to do. This stuff drives me nuts. It drives me nuts that he's misrepresenting things like this, or he just doesn't understand it and he's just talking out of his ass. I don't want to say that he's intentionally misrepresenting it. He's just out of his depth.
Yeah, I don't like to. I hate it within myself sometimes how I'll look at someone and say, and label them as dishonest, but sometimes the shoe fits. Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard not to say, because dealing with the tone of voice and the way they've shifted positions within the context of the argument, and the fact that they don't want to deal with what you asked directly, they want to shift it to, well, evolution isn't real, and how can you prove it without first proving time? That kind of ducking and dodging, like, okay, yeah, I'm getting the impression that you're a scumbag, so I think you might be in some of this stuff. I think you might be intentionally misrepresenting some things. He's definitely picking and choosing different things. He's just kind of throwing shit at you, hoping to derail the conversation, because we haven't gotten to really anything central to what this started out with, which was your belief system and how you can justify what you believe. You've been nice enough to let him lead into this. He wants a falsification for God, which makes no sense to me, because falsification is part of a scientific methodology, which he clearly has zero respect for. So, and now we're here.
Yeah, I had a couple of people back channel message me in Clubhouse after this saying that I was too conciliatory. And that's just it's a fault of mine, I guess.
The God of the Bible to not exist. It's no sweat off my skin, off my back either way. I frankly don't. Actually, that's not true. I do care, because the God of the Bible is a douche, and I don't like the idea of that God. But
I'm not really addressing what I'm telling you.
But that's
Michael.
but no, I don't need God not to exist. So what your question doesn't make sense.
I don't think you're understanding what I'm telling you.
No, maybe not. Maybe try explaining it again.
Yeah, the Christian God is in the category of that which is metaphysically primary. So you cannot apply these sort of probabilistic reasonings to the Christian God, or to any God which is categorized as that which is metaphysically ultimate. Okay, because
yeah, first of all, you can do whatever you want, because if somebody's just saying, okay, well, my God as defined as metaphysically ultimate, and therefore you can't defeat it, right? That's just an assertion, right? Now you have to prove that. JRobin doesn't seem to understand this. Like, JRobin, you'd have to prove that outside the simple claim. You might be able to make a sound argument and make this kind of modal ontological argument for God, where he is necessary for these reasons, thus and so, and this follows, and I've got a valid argument for it. Ding Dong JRobin would and Master Ding Dong Darth Dawkins would probably say, oh, well, it's valid and sound. Like, no, it's only sound if all the premises are true, the conclusion's true, right?
Yeah.
The only thing about the valid argument is that that's truth preserving should the premises be true. The conclusion must follow. And they don't seem to understand that. They're like, well, here's a great argument for it, and it's valid, therefore it comports to reality per the because logic conforms to the knowledge, the mind of God, therefore it must happen. This isn't just confusing the map for the place. This is saying the map makes the place.
Yeah, and part of the problem, like when this whole thing, we're getting into the kind of the bones of this. It's like, metaphysically primary, define this God into existence. Show me how this God, doesn't exist. Prove me this God, isn't necessary. These types of things. What this is, and I was explaining this to somebody else I was talking to a while back, is that I think, and this will, I'm curious as to how some of the people listening to this will react. I personally think that lack theism, the simple lack belief atheism, is almost as lazy as presuppositional apologetics. I think you should have the courage of your convictions. I think a lot of atheists, I should say a lot of atheists, actually, that lack of belief, I think it's, and many that I've spoken to, believe that God doesn't exist. I think there are some that I've spoken to who are a little bit afraid of the burden that places on them. I'm not afraid of my burden of proof. But what I think JRobin and Double D and the people of his ilk, I think their apologetic of, you have to prove to me how God's impossible, you have to demonstrate how God doesn't exist, has been born out of a decade or more of call-in shows where people would call in and say, these are my reasons to believe in God, and the person on the other end just says, yeah, I'm not convinced by that, I don't believe you, sorry, bring something else. And I can understand where theists have become frustrated at this. And I think somewhere along the line, some of them, not Double D and not JRobin, because I don't think they're smart enough to have done this, but somewhere along the line, maybe they got together, maybe they had a quorum and said, we're going to switch this fucker around. And we're going to say God exists until you prove he doesn't exist, and see how they like that. And that seems to be the apologetic that's getting employed here.
Yeah. I would push back a little bit on this, not to like start anything contentious, but I think that this is my opinion on it, and so take it for what it's worth.
Yeah.
I don't think that I understand why you'd probably get to the conclusion that lacktheism could be just as lazy as precept, because I've been around at least as long as you have watching this stuff, even before I had my own channel, watching some of these debates, and I've seen people use a kind of lacktheist defense, as that's usually called, in a way that I thought was kind of lazy and dismissive, right? Like, I don't have a burden of proof or anything like that, but I think that lacktheism actually, for lack of a better term. I mean, that's just a shorthand. I think it actually is something that's important, because I think what it actually more accurately describes, I agree with some people that have gone into these. I think Graham Oppy kind of gives this distinction as well.
Mm.
Well, atheism describes sort of the psychological position that you're in. I'm disinclined to believe in God, or I've just never been convinced one. And you get into this like fuzzy area of atheism, agnosticism, atheism kind of stuff. But I think though, and I've seen people who say that they're atheists get into these kinds of conversations where somebody like JRobin's like, what is your reason? A God does not exist because, and the first thing that they answer with, which is always going to not satisfy JRobin, is, well, I don't have any reason to believe in God. I think that informs a lacktheist, the lacktheist sense in which you're psychologically disinclined or you lack conviction in the belief of a God. But when they're at, what are your reasons for thinking that a God is not real? That's different. And that's where I agree with you. I think but I don't think they have to go through, and I think this is where the apologists overstep, is they seem to think like, I want, like JRobin, I want a falsifier for a God. You need to conclusively prove that gods don't exist. Like, no, all I have to say is I have to provide a reason for why I believe, this is my stance. And what my stance is, my own personal one is, and this may or may not work for others, is the evidence that I see about the gods that we're talking about. It's more likely that that's evidence of stories created by men than it is evidence of an actual being.
Sure. So for everybody watching, what Jefferson just proved is that he somehow has access to my private mental states, because he articulated what I was thinking better than I could. Because I agree.
Sorry.
No. It's good and it's fair. And I'm not using it to save face, but you really did articulate it. And I think it's because I've had so many of these discussions and I get jaded and tainted by them so much.
Everybody does. Yeah.
But you very nicely articulated what's underneath what I said. So I agree without caveat with what you said.
I appreciate that. Okay, so that's where we're at. For anybody who's worried about that kind of thing, that's sort of my position, and it's refreshing to hear that from Michael, because it is easy for people to get kind of jaded about that kind of stuff, especially if you see somebody kind of coming in like, I don't have to tell you why I don't believe it. I'm just saying that I don't. That last part I totally agree with. I just don't believe. Like, I'm just not convinced, because that is to pardon the expression, that is a motherfucker for Christians. If all you have to do is walk into a group of theists who are making fun of atheists and laughing and, oh, they're so stupid, they just don't believe in Jesus, and just ask them, look, I understand that you guys think this is important, and I'm inclined to think that there might be something missing from my stance. How do I get where you are? How do I get convinced? Because it seems like being convicted in my heart that this is real. I have to, like Paul says, I have to confess with my mouth and believe in my heart that that Jesus is Lord. Okay, how do I get there? Because that's not, and I will be saved. Paul says you will be saved.
Yep.
How do I get there when I'm just not convinced? Watch them fold.
Yeah.
They will get terrified, because that's the part that they're supposed to speak to. And at that point, they can minister to that person, be like, you know what? Part of that's the Holy Spirit. We can pray for you. We can discuss that. But I can't just tell you to believe it and then have you just fake it until you make it. That's no good. But they don't do that. They usually go quiet.
Yeah. I don't remember where I heard, but I heard somebody say once, and it bugs me now. Maybe you'll know who said it, but it was somebody on the atheist side of things who said something like, and I may get this wrong, but I think it was basically, if you convince me, I won't have any choice but to accept it. Right. So convince me of the truth of what it is that you're like. You believe it's true. You're convinced it's true. Convince me.
Right.
And what you need to do that is you need a much gentler hand and heart than JRobin has.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because what he wants to do from his perspective and Darth's, and this is where I think this has gotten very poisonous, is if you follow them along, it doesn't matter whether or not you're convinced or not. They're holding to this notion that if you're a rational person and they lay out a rational argument, one should accept the rational argument rather than reject it. And that's his whole appeal. Like, oh, so you admit you're being arbitrary? You admit you're being irrational? Well, then you don't believe in the so-called scientific, methodological, naturalistic, materialistic frame of worldview that you claim to be. You're just, I think you might just be crazy, right? That's not a fair way of putting it, right? Like the whole point is like they're disregarding that lack of conviction and then blaming the person for it while not providing anything to get them over that hump. Whether it's just a lack of being convinced or just like, I'm skeptical or I'm not convinced because I just think there's stories. What do I do? Let's say that you're right and it is all real. Where do I go from there? They don't have that. And their apologetics, their entire approach to this has been bankrupt in that capacity. And this is why Christian apologetics in this vein makes atheists. It makes skeptics.
Yeah, they don't need Peter Boghossian. They do it all by themselves.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's play a little bit more of this out in here. And
yeah, we're horrible.
We are not making good time. Both of us are chatty today. So
part 3 coming up.
Part 3 through 9 will be coming soon, folks. All right, I'm gonna play this for a few minutes here straight. Okay. I'm gonna step away for just a couple. I'll be right back in like a minute. But
when you're appealing to probability, you're appealing to these other derivative facts and other information that is going to derive from your metaphysical context. Okay, so it's not these proximate facts themselves. It is the worldview and the metaphysic that they derive from that you're going to have to use to falsify God, right? So you're kind of doing I wouldn't call it a category error, but you're doing you're not really answering the question as to how God doesn't exist.
Well, okay, I'm sorry that you think that I'm not answering your question, but
okay, so God is not.
I've given you my reasons. So if we go back a moment, because perhaps there was a misunderstanding, right? So when we started talking about the Christian God, right? I'm like, these are the reasons why I am convinced the God you believe in does not exist. Okay, so maybe we can get further. I'm not sure. Maybe we can get further if you can give me some reasons why, or what convinces you that the Christian God does exist.
Yeah, I did this. I went over this earlier. The Christian God has certain properties that are required for intelligibility and knowledge and rationality and etc. Those properties are that God is ultimate. He's eternal, a mind, omniscient, omnipotent, revelatory, personal, always truth revealing. If God were to be deficient in any of these properties, we would lose our grounding for epistemology and ontology.
So, that's right. I apologize. You did say that before, and that's when I asked you the question, though. So, does that mean that if so when you talk about lying, right? You're referring to Titus chapter 1 where it says God can't lie. Is that where you're getting the truth from?
And also in Hebrews, yes.
Oh yeah. Okay, I forgot about the Hebrews one. Yeah, the Titus one is just always one that sticks out of my mind.
And Numbers as well. Although Numbers is a little bit of a weaker argument, but there's also a verse in Numbers which says that God is not a man that he should lie. But the Hebrews is a little bit stronger, where it says that God simply just cannot lie.
Yeah, I think that's the reciting in Titus 2 where it says God cannot lie. I think is the wording. It just come flat out. God can't lie.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. So yeah. Do you need me to go in? Do you need me to unpack any of that for you?
No, I guess what I'm interested in is here's an interesting question. What's your final authority?
God.
So God as as in how exactly? So God as revealed through the Bible, or God as in how he speaks to you? Or what do you mean exactly?
Ontologically, the final authority is God because he's metaphysically primary. But yeah, with respect to my epistemology, how I know things, then I'm going to be appealing to God's revelation.
Okay, but this is where things get derailed. So because he's actually talking about two different kinds of authority here. In an ontological sense, that God is the final authority definitionally for JRobin because it made everything. So easy enough to wrap your head around. But a final authority epistemologically, God can't be the final authority for JRobin's epistemology simply because it reveals things to him. Because once it's revealed things to him, JRobin's sense experiences and his subjective, his consciousness has to interpret that revelation. And so epistemologically, everyone's final. I agree with Smokey Saint on this because I think he said the same thing. Your final authority is going to be your own. Is going to be coming from your own subjective experience, your own reason and rationality.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and that's why I found it interesting that he said that, because a lot of Christians that I talk to, when I ask them what their final authority is, a lot of them will say the Bible, right? God's revelation as represented in the Bible. So that's why I had to go with that further question, because he talks to you. Like, what do you mean exactly?
Right, and they can just say, well, yeah, and if they, I mean, it's true theologically for Christians that when they say the Bible, they're basically just talking about special revelation because Bible's in that category. But what I think is interesting is that for Christians, I think this is actually important for them to consider. The notion that precepts like, the people that are kind of, they're sort of like cherry picking different aspects of the precept art. They keep a lot of it, but there's certain things that I think that they're the parts that they're pulling off that aren't making the vehicle run as well as it could, is this notion that, well, God is the foundation and ultimate authority for my epistemology, not merely my autonomous reasoning, right? Darth rails about that all the time. Like, you can't trust your so-called autonomous reasoning. Well, the problem with that, though, is that if you can't, like, from the Van Tillian perspective, that makes absolute sense because Van Til was a through and through Calvinist. And Calvinists believe in predetermination and the elect and people and the reprobate and all that kind of stuff, and they believe it in a sense that people have been predetermined to be saved and those that haven't been. The elect are already chosen, and if you believe in a God that's transcendent in the space, that it's not temporal or confined by space, then it's not experiencing time in terms of tenses, so it already knows who's getting saved and who's not. It's already deemed those that are worthy and those that are not worthy. It's built those for preservation and those for construction, as I think that's in, what is it, in Hebrews? But before I ramble on this too much, my issue with this kind of theology is that it divorces Christians from sin. There's a real problem here, an entailment, that if God is revealing things to you and he's the final authority of not just how we can know things, right? He created us and he created our minds and our rational sensibilities, but he's ultimately revealing everything that we need to know about the world around us on a day-to-day basis. And we don't, as a Christians acknowledge that we don't have to trust to our autonomous reasoning. Then we're not guilty of sin. God is.
Yeah.
And I don't think they get that that's a real, like, it doesn't take a lot of steps to move toward, like, okay, well, if I can conclude that my ultimate authority for what I know and don't know is coming from God and it's based on what he chooses to reveal to me, well, then the reason that I'm inclined to, these homicidal impulses is because this is something about the world that God has revealed to me. Right. I have a problem with this because now that they've included that, now how are they going to go about talking about things like sin, suppressing the truth and unrighteousness, tempter beings like Satan or demonic forces or any of these other, the effects of sin and all this kind of stuff, right, is just going to be layers tacked onto that. And then they're going to have to create all these special circumstances and make all these special arguments to show and prove how those particular things can somehow violate or be superimposed upon or even completely derail God's revelation. That is not a Calvinist idea. The idea that God is going to reveal things to you or that he's chosen you to be, like, that's the irresistible grace, baby. The Holy Spirit's going to make you a Christian, whether you like it or not. It's coming and it's going to change your heart, right? Calvinists have no problem with this. Darth Dawkins has stepped away from Calvinism. He's not a full Calvinist, and you could tell because of this kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah, he has said flat out he rejects tulip and all that stuff.
Yeah. And I think that's why, because the reason he rejects it is because he likes to have the worst of both worlds in Christianity. He wants enough free will from Arminian. He wants the predetermined stuff, because enough of the predetermined stuff to make his God extra badass, but he wants enough Arminian free will to blame people who don't choose Christ, so he can judge people.
Fair, yeah, fair, yep.
So, and that's apparent even with JRobin's tendencies, because he wants to own people and punish people and that kind of stuff on verbally on the internet. And what I'm seeing here is just a real problem with this. Like, I don't understand why I can be held accountable for sin when all this revelation and everything about my epistemology, including the conclusions that I make, are dependent entirely upon God.
Right.
So, sorry for that tangent.
No,
Here we go.
You're good.
Where he's done so in numerous different aspects. So he's revealed himself, and generally we speak about it in two categories. We speak about it in natural revelation, which are all things that God has created, and then
Doesn't that beg the why doesn't revelation, that? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Special revelation. You mean the Bible? Okay.
Yeah, the Bible would be in the category of special revelation.
Okay.
Things like the biblical prophets, they had been specially revealed to. Moses has been specially revealed to because God directly communicated to him. Do you consider
if God speaks to an individual? I guess maybe that's a different question. So I don't want to rabbit trail us to ask you a different question that right now. Okay, so the first one you said was general revelation. So you said God. Can you restate that thing about general revelation? Can you restate it again?
All things that God has created. So you and me would be in the category of general revelation.
Okay. Can you help me understand how that isn't special pleading? Oh, pardon me. No, that's the wrong thing. I said the wrong thing. How that isn't begging the question?
How begging the question against what?
Well, because you're saying it's like, so we are a product of God's creation. That begs the question that the God exists. So it's like if I was a lawyer right now, I'd be like, objection, Your Honor, assuming facts, not evidence. So like when you say, oh, look, God is evident through, you said two ways, right? You said general revelation and special revelation. General revelation, you said God is evident through his creation. That begs the question that the God exists. But we don't know that yet.
No.
Okay, and that's why I asked you what your starting point, or part. I didn't ask you that yet. But so I guess another question would be, what's your starting point, Robin?
Okay, you asked me like so many different
Good
questions.
question.
I'm trying to make sure that we're getting this clear.
Okay.
The question that you asked me, the question that you asked me that I was responding to was, what was my final?
So in a moment, he's going to tell me that it's going to start to go downhill very quickly.
Ooh.
How I can't focus, right? And it's also, he's also going to give a different explanation for begging the question, and how I don't understand that, and how he's not doing that.
Okay. I'm looking forward to this, because I think if that's the case, if he goes super personal quickly, he might prove my little theory about him that I was pontificating on in my video last night. He might prove that wrong. So let's see.
Final authority. Then
you said
my final authority.
God is your final authority. Okay.
Yeah. In the ontological sense, God is metaphysically primary. Okay. And then when it comes to how I can know things, when it comes to the final authority on knowledge, how I can know things to be the case, is because God revealed them. There's no special pleading in that, in what I said, or not special, but there's no begging the question.
But
all I'm doing is answering.
Right.
God is how I know things to be the case.
Right.
Now there is the assumption that God exists, but that's not begging the question that God does exist, because you're just asking me how I know things to be the case.
Okay, so but what you're saying is
the conclusion is not God. It would only be begging the question if the conclusion was that God exists, which is not.
But that is the conclusion from. I think that's actually what you were going to say here.
That is your conclusion, isn't it?
No, the conclusion is that I know things to be the case. Right? You asked me what my final authority is, and I said epistemologically, my final authority is God's revelation. So
but he also said, but he opened that by saying ontologically. So he concluded that there actually is a being, in actual reality. And the reason that and the reason that he can know that is because of everything it's created. I believe that's where he went with that. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, that's where it went.
Okay.
There's no begging the question there.
But in order for it to be God's revelation,
wow, look. Begging the question is
if
when
it's
the
God's
premise,
revelation, it means God exists, which means it's begging the question.
No, it's all begging the question is what happens when you are putting the conclusion in one of the premises, right? So it really it's what you're using in an argument. I'm not aware of anywhere in the premises. Let's say if you get an argument, I know something to be the case. God reveals things. Just say God reveals things infallibly without lying. I'm on the receiving end of God's revelation. Therefore, I know something to be the case. There's nowhere in that argument where the conclusion is in the premise. So that wouldn't be begging the question.
But you're saying, but you are saying that God exists, and we haven't established that yet.
I'm saying that. Listen. Did you understand what I said when I said that?
Yeah, I did.
For begging the question. Okay, good. So where is the conclusion of the argument? It's a rough argument. Okay, I could revise it, but just for the sake of, I just like threw the.
I'll just save JRobin some time. Yeah, you could revise it, but you're still going to be begging the question if this is like the foundation for how you're doing it. Boy.
And it's really interesting because I become incredibly conciliatory here. And so what I do, unfortunately, we're getting close to my cap on time here. And so we're going to, hopefully people are enthralled and we'll come back for part 3.
Yeah.
But it's like, I have to like what I end up doing, and I guess we'll hear this next time, is I end up basically conceding that I made a mistake, that he didn't beg the question, but that he made an assumption. And that what we do is and that's because that's the only way he'll continue. Like that's how he can't accept the fact that, it's like when somebody is saying, listen, because God exists and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, whoa, that's where you're assuming, a fact not yet in evidence. He won't accept that at all. He goes back to this whole, it wasn't in one of the premises in the argument, therefore it's not fallacious. And the only way he'll continue the argument is by me saying, I fucked up. Sorry, you just made an assumption.
I guess I would. I mean, if you're going to ask that big question, why is there something rather than nothing? And a believer like JRobin is like, well, because God. And you're like, well, why God? Well, because there is something rather than nothing. Like, okay, but that's just begging the question, right? You're just saying that, with the reason for stuff existing is that it exists, and that's proof of the thing that made it. Like, how did you get there? You can't, like, that's just completely circular.
Yeah, cart before the horse much.
Yeah, and to try to say no, I'm not begging the question. I'm just assuming it. Okay, for the purposes of this is silly of JRobin, because I think he's actually picked this up from trying to hang out in Discord channels where he's dealt with guys trying to show him how to set things up like syllogisms and shit. If you're assuming it for an argument, then the argument can be entertained within the confines of that argument. But when he's trying to say, I'm assuming it for real,
yeah,
that is begging the question, because he is essentially saying, like, I acknowledge that the world around us is the creation of God, and that's how I know a God exists. Like, that's begging the question because you just assume that this is created.
Yeah.
You haven't demonstrated that the world around you is a creation and therefore a creator. So, yeah. Oh boy. All right. You want to play a little bit more, because we're almost to that cap, but we can.
Yeah, we kind of I've gotten kind of a visual cue from my wife.
We can wrap it up now.
We kind of like, no, not so much, but no, we had we have something we have a family thing we have to go to, so unfortunately I'm still just out of bed mode essentially. Okay. So unfortunately we do have to kind of, but if the audience's ears aren't bleeding too much and you're willing, then we can just continue on later.
Okay, yeah, let's so I guess we'll wrap this up by saying there's a part 3 coming, folks. Yay and oh my god, and so congratulations and I'm sorry, I guess, in order, equally, depending on how you feel about these discussions. But yeah, no, I think we'd probably be able to cap this first part off. I think the second video is probably a little bit shorter, and from what I mean, we can discuss all that stuff later, but yeah, we'll set this up and schedule it probably for next week, maybe same time, but we'll have to play that by ear depending on how Michael's schedule works and mine. But
It
yeah,
has the
just
capacity to work.
yeah. So yeah, part 3 coming up hopefully next weekend. Thanks everybody in the live chat. Always a good discussion being had there. I really appreciate your comments. Most of you guys are very funny, very insightful, very witty, and offensive. I appreciate all of that, and I thank you for showing up, especially this early. Special thanks to Michael for being here again on another weekend to talk about this.
Yeah, no, it's good. Sorry to have to be the one to say cut. But
nope. Nope, real life intrudes, and that takes precedence. So yeah, you got family stuff. I totally get that. I respect that. So yep, we'll wrap this up now. We're going to sign off. Everyone have a great day. Thank you again for coming. Enjoy your weekend if you can, if you're well into it, depending on your time zone. I hope it's going good so far. We will see you all when we see you. Take care and stay safe.
Cheers, everybody.